Borderlands 3 on a 2070 Super, and although at the moment you can probably see I'm getting about 60 frames, this is because Borderlands 3 is a bit weird when it starts the game. Even though this is set to 4K, this isn't actually running at 4K. For some strange reason, when you start the game, it actually runs it at 1080p. So I was playing this loads thinking, oh, this is great, my graphics card is, really cool, running really silently, and for the most part I can actually tell that it wasn't running at 4K. And the reason that I realised this is if you notice the GPU temperature and frame rate at the top left, you notice that the text is actually really big, which is kind of your first clue that this is not running at 4K. So just to fix this, whenever you let's put snow on that. You go into the options, you just have to set the visual quality. So even though again we set this is 4K, go in and set this to Windows borderless, click apply, and then when it asks you to apply the changes, just hit no. So that way you don't actually have to go and change anything. Now you'll notice instantly that as I said, the frame rate counter and the GPU temperature are now much smaller. So now we are in fact running at 4K. So maybe this will get patched in a subsequent version, I'm not sure. But also you'll notice that the GPU temperature is now starting to increase on the 2070. Bear in mind this is one of the ASUS cards which have got a dual fan, so even though this will be reaching at about 80 frames, 80 degrees C, you don't really notice the temperature here. So you can see just if you are in an action heavy, lots of stuff happening on screen, you'll see that the card kind of stays roughly at 60 frame rate, and the 2070 Super is probably completely overkill for a game like Borderlands, but it does show you can play this at 4K, which is really cool. It's a shame they don't have ray tracing, although it probably wouldn't work on this, but it'd be nice if it had HDR. I'm going to run away from that thing because I think that probably will kill me. Let's go over the bridge. So yeah, so this is kind of the frame you'll be getting on Borderlands if you're playing on a 2070 Super. As I said, in the update, which we actually just saw on screen, perhaps they'll fix this issue with 4K not being the default resolution when you start the game. In fact, actually, I think the game loads at 4K, and then the screen kind of flickers, and you can see it gets changed to 1080p on the fly. Bearing in mind, although you can't actually see this game does actually support Dolby Atmos. So if you do have a amplifier with Dolby Atmos support, if you go into options, sounds, you'll see that right down at the end, you'll see spatial sound is enabled. So if you have a Dolby Atmos enabled sound system, I'm not sure if you've got the Dolby Atmos for headphones if that will count as well as spatial sound, but you'll notice that the actually let's just kill that. That the Dolby Atmos is enabled. So I haven't actually really been able to try it out too much because I have just got it working. And bearing in mind, if you are running at 4K, I would check your HDMI cables if you have any issues, because although I've been running this for quite some time, as you can see on level 21, at 1080p I didn't notice any issues. So if you are suddenly deciding to run this at 4K and you'll have issues with either the screen blacking out or flickering or kind of snowy artifacts, do check your HDMI cables, because I was running a much smaller cable over like an HDMI coupler and had all sorts of issues. So just check that you have got the right cable lengths and don't try and extend them, or you might run into issues, because once you start running at 4K you'll notice that the HDMI cables will may start to show any issues. So actually not much happening here in Borderlands at the moment. It's actually quite peaceful, which is quite strange for Borderlands, but at least you can take in the scenery, and you can see now that my graphics card is now heated up to 80 degrees. So if you are constrained for cooling or heating or noise, take this into consideration. However, I did have a 1070 previously, and when that got up to 80 degrees, or almost 85, 86, it was really loud when that kind of kicked into gear. So I do recommend getting the RTX 2070 Super, because it is a more efficient processor, and if noise is an issue for you, it is for me because this is in my living room, and I find that the graphics card does run a touch cooler, and even when the fans are on, it's not that big of an issue. So if you're running or planning on running at 4K, do better set in mind that the extra heat and noise does make a big difference between this and 1080p. So keep that in mind.